So we're going to wait just a few more minutes while people are still logging in and coming to the program. Thank you for being here and for being patient. I see a lot of people coming in right now. We'll wait until we have most of the people who we know are coming here, and then we'll begin. Let's say 2 more minutes. It looks like we still have about 50 people yet to go. What do you think? Shall we start or shall we wait? We should start. Okay, let's go ahead and start, and people will come in as they come in. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I think we have a lot of people who are new to the museum, and we're happy to have you here. These noontime talks have been a regular part of OJMCHE programming for many years now. And since the pandemic, we're all enjoying this move to virtual presentations because now so many of you can come from all over the country and all over the world. Whether or not this is your lunch hour, we're happy to have you here. We try and keep these presentations to the 1 hour lunch hour, but this one might go over a little bit. We understand if you have to log off before we're finished. We are recording this session and it will be available on our website, on the recorded events section of our website. Afterwards, so you can watch it as many times as you want. My name is LeVant Prahl, and I'm the curator of the collection at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education here in Portland, Oregon. I have been monitoring this project of translating the 175 or so letters written by Emanuel and Regine Loew for nearly 2 years now. With the United States Postal Service so prominently in our American news right now, the nature of mail delivery under fascism has been on all of our minds. We are reminded that the Nazis pointed to the fact that their mail service was functioning as usual as proof to a watching world that everything under their regime was working well until it wasn't. I invite you to dive into this world with our wonderful panel who have devoted their time over these 2 years to the project. First, we have, you want to wave? We have Bob Lowe, who's related to some of you, who instigated this entire project after he received the letters and brought them to the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. He has been on a journey of deepening his connection to Judaism and exploring his roots, and these letters fit right into that. We at the museum were just as eager as Bob to learn what was in the letters, since neither of us speak German. As a Center for Holocaust Education, we were hoping that they would shed some light into life in Nazi-occupied Vienna, and they certainly have done that. We brought along Christopher Stauder. Want to wave, Christopher? Who came on board right from the beginning, and he has been the project leader on this entire translation project. We are so grateful that he is using his retirement to benefit scholarship in this way, and so gratified that he has taken a personal interest in these letters and in the people who wrote them. When the scope of what we were asking Christoph to do became apparent, I enlisted some more help for him in the form of Ingrid Preston, another native German. And Ingrid is the mother of one of OJM's own. Her daughter Sandra worked for us for several years. And Ingrid had already donated her time and her professional translating skills to other smaller projects at the museum. She and Christoph took on an awful lot when they agreed to work with us, and we're very grateful. If you have questions for these panelists during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A area and save the chat area to check in with each other and us and tell us where you're watching from. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Bob and have him give us a little background.
And the first words you'll hear will be from Ingrid.
Wien, den 8. Oktober 1938. Meine Lieben, bevor der Versöhnungstag beginnt, will ich euch noch Fritzls Brief beantworten und euch alles Gute und Schöne wünschen. Selbst wenn man nicht gläubig ist, muss man im heurigen Jahr den lieben Gott bitten, sich unser in diesem Jahre mehr als je anzunehmen, unsere Arbeit zu segnen und unser nicht zu vergessen.
Vienna, October 4, 1938. My dear ones, before Yom Kippur gets underway, I want to quickly reply to Fritz's letter and wish you everything good and beautiful. Even if one isn't a believer and religious, one must ask dear God to be with us this year more than ever. Bless our work and not forget us. This year, I must say my prayers at home since there is no place for us. But I hope that God will hear them and bless my children's and grandchildren's work and keep all of them healthy. Be well, all of you. Kisses from your mama. These are the words of my grandmother, Regina Loew. And let's begin by introducing you to my family. The grandparents who wrote almost all of these letters are Regina, born Krasny. She was born in 1870 in Přerov, which is now part of the Czech Republic. When she was born there, it was part of the Habsburg or Austrian-Hungarian Empire. She was one of 7 siblings, married when she was 24 years old. And after the family moved to Vienna, she was quite active in the Women's International Zionist Association. Regina died in 1942 at Treblinka. Her husband, my grandfather, Emanuel Loew, was also born in Přerov 4 years earlier, and like Regina was one of 7. He was a gymnasium professor. And gymnasium is the equivalent of, in the US system, about 5th grade through the first 2 years of college. He had a doctorate in philosophy and taught the classics, including philosophy, Latin, Greek, And as you can see from this photo, he published some of his work. Emanuel died in 1942 in the Jewish ghetto of Vienna. These are the people you'll hear about in these letters. Regina and Emanuel, who lived in Vienna throughout the time of this correspondence. The first of their children to emigrate to the US was Friedrich or Fritz. He and his wife Rosal and their two children, Peter and Rosemary, moved to New York. The second to move was the oldest of the three, Erich, with his wife Margaret or Gretel, and their two children, Carrie and Kurt. My father was the youngest, and at the beginning of this correspondence, he was in Sofia, Bulgaria, and near the end, he moved to San Francisco. He was unmarried when he came to the US and only later met and married my mother, and I came along. Before we start reading the letters, I want to take us back to Regina's letter just before Yom Kippur. Had Regina been able to attend Yom Kippur services, one of the prayers she would have heard is the Hineni prayer, which is chanted by the Chazan, the cantor. Hineni, here I am, flawed and not worthy to stand before you, says the cantor. That's how I feel today, charged with distilling the lives of two people into an hour, two people I never met, whom I know only through a few stories and through these 168 letters. From these small fragments of their lives, we chose even smaller fragments to share with you today. This has been a deeply spiritual task, and like the Chazan on Yom Kippur, something that I can only approach knowing my inadequacy. May sharing the words of our ancestors transform their suffering into wisdom, and may it bring forward the love they should for each other to create love in our time. As we read from the letters, I will show slides with the chronology, and we won't read the whole chronology. You'll be able to read that and follow along if you hear the letters. But just to highlight what happened before the first letter, in March of 1938 was the Anschluss, when Germany annexed Austria, and within a month after that, harsh regulations against Jews came into place. Requiring to register assets, pay hefty taxes. Jews and their Gentile spouses were fired from civilian jobs. And in about June of 1938 is when my father left Vienna for Sofia. In August of 1938, Fritz's family, his wife Rose and their two children, embarked on the SS Penland to sail from Antwerp to New York City. And it's while they were en route that Regina wrote the first letter.
August 12. Dear Rose, dear children. Hopefully the ship continued to behave as well as it had promised during the first few days of your voyage, and you arrived safe and sound in your new home country. Given the prevailing circumstances, we are doing about as well as we can. For good measure, our lease for the apartment was terminated, and so were the leases of all the other fellow believers in our building. After writing more about the eviction notice, Regina continues. Gretel is primarily assembling various documents for a possible emigration, but it is hard when one doesn't know yet where to. It's 9 o'clock in the evening. Papa, thank God, is sleeping soundly, and my eyes too are falling shut, so good night. Goodbye and stay well. Cordial kisses to you all from your mama.
August 24th, 1938. Dear Rosa and dear children, Upon returning from the coffee house with Papa, I find your card in our mailbox and want to write you right away how happy we were about your nice report. May God reward your dear aunt for taking you poor immigrants in with such love. And you, Peterle, what will you do? Have you recovered from the exertion of the last days in Vienna and the trip? Many greetings and kisses from Grandpa and Grandma.
And Peter was their 16-year-old son at the time. October 4th. Papa will have nothing if emigrating to America. And if one considers that we have an income here and aren't all that badly off, now that, thank God, the danger of war is behind us, it would be foolish to be a burden to our children who are in the process of building a new life for themselves.
October 14th. Yesterday, I submitted the application for entry into the USA. And since we are native Czechoslovakian, it depends on what the quota is, whether we will have to wait 1 or 2 years. By then, we hope you, as well as Erich and family, will have both feet on the ground, and we can live with you without feeling bad.
So in a 10-day period, they went from Papa will have nothing of emigrating to submitting an application to emigrate. And throughout the 168 letters, there's profound ambivalence going back and forth about should we stay, should we leave? November 9, Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. This was a massive pogrom throughout the German Reich, throughout the Third Reich. Here we see a photograph of a synagogue in Vienna burning. Here we see the broken glass in the storefronts of Jewish shops and clear marking to let people know that these are the Jewish shops. November 21st. I'm afraid that you are very worried about us. Those worries are not totally unjustified. It is better, however, not to go into details. And Regina is very circumspect about not being explicit about what's going on. I imagine she was afraid of censors. Rosala, thank God on your knees that you and your children are outside. Carrie and Kurt had to watch and hear a lot. Thank God Erich stayed home. Please, Rose. I would like to accept a job as a temporary cook where I don't have to work too hard, although I am used to doing work. We absolutely do not want to be a burden to you. You certainly have to struggle enough.
December 5th, 1938. You have no idea how much the situation here has changed since you left. No wonder that our quiet, deliberate Erich has become a pessimistic human being, tortured by worry and heartache. May God give that the promised documentation will finally come this week, and that Erich finally will have the opportunity to immigrate.
January 16th. My dear children, the time will soon come when we will be all alone here, and our thoughts will have to take wings. For now, we can still spend Sundays with Erich and the children, but soon we will be confined to being with you in thought only and waiting longingly for mail until our hour too will come. We pack our things and can fly across to you. Erich and Gretel know what it's like here, and when you've had a chance to talk about the situation, you can make decisions together. But as long as we have our income here, it would be a sin to be a burden on you.
My dear Fritz, enclosed is a short excerpt from my work. And the work Emanuel is talking about is his writing about philosophy, and in particular about Heraclitus, an ancient Greek philosopher whom he had a particular interest, passion about. And he enclosed with this letter a 4-page draft manuscript. Perhaps the librarian or university professor would be interested in the topic. In case there is interest, I could possibly be invited by the university with the justification that in the German Reich my work is unpublishable. A favorable decision would bring us closer to a reunion in the near future. Otherwise, there will be no way for a trip before September, especially since the consulate is working very slowly. All of you are cordially embraced, your papa and grandpa. Notice the mention of the consulate and working slowly. Regina and Emanuel pinned their hopes on the United States' willingness to admit refugees and on a timely and fair process. But again and again, there were delays and bureaucratic barriers. The excerpts here only hint the extent of that challenge. There are 61 references to the consulate in these letters. Ingrid?
Oh, sorry. June 18th, 1939. Erich's first letter arrived on June 14th. And to our great joy, the very next day we received your letter, Gretel. We actually had mixed feelings when we read what a difficult task you, Gretel, have taken on. May God give you the strength and courage to endure this time of toil and trouble, and may the hope that it is only a transition hold you upright.
And the difficult tasks that she's referring to, in Austria, Erich had a doctorate. He'd been an attorney, and now they're working as a live-in butler and cook.
July the 3rd. When, for instance, I take Papa to a little restaurant, he wants to have a little glass of beer. And when someone then lets him know that he can't drink it outside in the fresh air, but must drink it inside the restaurant, practically in hiding, he loses his taste for it.
August 16. Papa is abandoning the idea of going to Italy. He can't change locations that often. And since we cannot stay any longer in our apartment, we are glad to find shelter with Aunt Emma, since they are sticking several people into every room in the larger apartments. Aunt Emma is Emanuel's sister. And the letter continues. Fritz, you described the visit to the temple so compellingly that I yearn to hear the Luchad of Dila Krat Kala once again. Here one knows nothing about religious service anymore. Only on the inside has one not forgotten God and always keeps hoping that things will turn out differently. And then, you cannot imagine the misery that exists. Do you know that Kurt Lederer's mother chose to commit suicide? The poor woman lost her nerve when she was supposed to vacate her apartment.
May 16. For the time being, we don't hear anything about our departure. Only by the end of June will the consulate work again. Only then can we find out whether the papers are all in order or if something is still missing. The weather is usually bad, so that we cannot walk very often, even less sit in the park. The flowering chestnuts we can only see from afar.
And when Regina talks about the weather, we don't think this is a meteorological statement. She's talking about whether it's safe for Jews to be out on the street. October 30. Tomorrow we will be thinking of our dear Carrie and join in celebrating her birthday in spirit, just as I am accompanying our youngest on his journey bent over the map. And this is the map she would have been looking at as he traveled from Sofia to Varna and then across the Black Sea to Odessa in Russia, on to Moscow, and then on a long multi-day trip on the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Vladivostok, across to Japan, and finally on a ship to Hawaii and then San Francisco. 1941, October 17, Emanuel writes, "Dear children, do your best, for there won't be anything to do." And in that month, all Jewish emigration from the Reich is halted.
Regina is writing to Gustav, who has just made it to the US. December the 1st. My dear Gustav, with many thanks for your dear lines, I can only tell you that we are always with all of you in our thoughts and think about what you all decided about our future. We really do not know what to think of first. Despite all of our concerns, the letters of Erich and his family make us very happy. It seems, praise God, that they have hit it off well and that you're all doing quite well. If only our future would look a little rosier. Papa hopes confidently that he will see his children and grandchildren and take pleasure in their sight. Farewell, my boy. I'm a little distracted. Heartfelt greetings and kisses from your mama and papa.
And this was the last message my grandparents sent. 6 days later, Pearl Harbor was attacked. 4 days after that, Germany declared war on the US and all mail service ended. In 1942, in March, Emanuel died in Vienna. He had diabetes and Jews could no longer get insulin. In April, Helena Krasny-Kugel, Regina's sister, and Helena's husband Hans were transported to the Lublin district and murdered. In July, Regina was transported to Theresienstadt with Emanuel's sister Emma and Emma's husband Sigmund. And on September 21st, Regina was deported to Treblinka and murdered. Three years later, Erich, now in Philadelphia, wrote to his brother Fritz, who now goes by Fred. And yet, if I read how these same Germans, who thought to be masters of the world, now pretend not to know what happened, and how they still try to explain that they did not want the war, I can't help feeling that we are not over the top yet. Erich's writing is prophetic. Some lessons are never learned, and some are forgotten. We Americans have thought of ourselves as masters of the world. We've inscribed on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." And yet 75 years after Erich's letter, the United Nations reports there are 26 million refugees in the world. People are dying because, like Regina and Emanuel, they can't get into the United States. And today, about 30,000 asylum seekers and refugees are interned in this country in detention centers, where over 6,000 have contracted COVID. Will we be the ones who pretend not to know what happened? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was beautiful, and thank you all for the readings. I'd like to turn now to our translators for a little insight into their process and their journey with the letters. Let's begin with you, Ingrid, and then we'll go to Christoph.
I would like to start by saying what a great honor it was for Christoph and me to participate in this project. As a translator, I see myself as a facilitator of understanding. And for me, the most important aspect of this project was that Bob and his extended family would get to know Bob's grandparents, Regina and Emanuel, and hear about what they went through from 1938 to 1941. However, Regina's and Emanuel's stories of their life in a world of tyranny, persecution, and genocide should be told to a much broader audience, and I'm excited to hear that the museum is contemplating plans to use the rich material in the letters for educational purposes. In my first conversation with Christoph, I found out that there were over 170 letters and postcards to be translated. Most of them were written by Regina, who wrote in an old German script which needed to be transcribed before it could be translated. Translating was the most rewarding part of this process. As translators, we had the enormous responsibility to reflect as closely as possible what was said in the original. It was not our task to make anything sound better or clarify what was not explicitly expressed in the text. Our task was to bring these letters and postcards to life and to make the voices in the letters heard as they were expressed in the original version. One of the most fascinating aspects of these letters was that they were written by real people, describing events and emotions in real time and in their own words. In order to reflect Regina's and Emanuel's evolution of emotions as accurately as possible, we had to try to experience it along with them, without the knowledge of what would be happening next. Therefore, Christoph and I decided to translate the letters in chronological order as much as possible to make the process very personal. Most of the letters were written by Regina. She is the narrator, and Emanuel gladly lets her do this work. We see everything through her eyes. She is the one expressing their love for their children and grandchildren. She tries to keep the family connected by informing everyone of what everyone else is doing. She's not afraid to be frank at times, especially when she hasn't heard anything from one of her sons in a while. But she also can be vague when she's either afraid her letters might be censored or she doesn't want to alarm her family about what is going on in her world. Regina seems to be always in a hurry when writing her letters. She works them in between chores or when her husband is working on his article. However, it is amazing how she's always able to express deep and meaningful thoughts and to give clear reports of recent events. Emanuel only writes a few letters, and his additions to Regina's letters are always very short. He only steps in when the subject matter is very serious. Emanuel's biggest contribution to this collection is an article about the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who lived around 300 BC. Emanuel immersed himself in this scholarly work because it was something that he enjoyed doing, and it helped him escape thinking about what was happening in the outside world. Worth mentioning here is also that the collection includes a number of letters by Regina's sons and other relatives. These letters are rich with new insights from different perspectives. The story to get to know the Loew family starts with a letter written in August of 1938, several months after the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany. The world around them had changed drastically for the worse. Almost daily, new laws and regulations were introduced for the Jewish population. Jews were exposed to harassment and persecution. It was a world of constant change and uncertainty. At this time, Emanuel is still somewhat ambivalent about leaving, but Regina states in her very first letter, and I quote, "I'd go to the end of the earth to get out of this hell." Regina definitely wants her children to make the move to the US, and eventually they all do. Soon after her first letter, Regina and Emanuel start the process for immigration to the US. And she describes with great frustration their constant struggle with the bureaucracies of the Nazi regime as well as the American consulate to get all their immigration papers in order, a struggle they lost in the end. Their home is their refuge. It is a place where they are looking for normalcy by playing cards, inviting guests, writing letters. As time goes by, even those activities become threatened. The card parties come to a halt and fewer guests come to the house, as more people are leaving for faraway places. And at the end, the mail service is halted to and from foreign countries. We follow them through all their ups and downs of emotions. Regina tries to be the strong one when Emanuel breaks down, but now and then they cry together. Regina ends her very last postcard by saying to Gustav, Bob's father, "Farewell, my boy. I'm a little distracted." She's expressing an overwhelming feeling of being lost and a foreboding of bad things to come. It was very hard for us to say goodbye at that point. Regina and Emanuel come to life for us. We were humbled to know that they had shared their love with us. We will never forget that.
Thank you, Ingrid. Now, Christoph, you have a PowerPoint for us?
Yes.
Wonderful.
My dear children, meine lieben Kinder. As Ingrid has already said, this correspondence was overwhelmingly written by Regina, and it really is the story of this woman, the story of her heart. She's the bedrock of this family, the anchor. When Emanuel loses hope, Regina is there. When a letter comes with good news, she is there. When a decision needs to be made, she is there. When it's time to say farewell at the end, she's there. The word good appears over 180 times in this correspondence. Let's take a closer look at Regina does when she is not writing a letter. She's 68 years old, but as she says about herself, not over the hill yet. There's a flurry of activity going on in the apartment. Tuesday is laundry day. Papa needs to have his blood sugar checked. Food needs to be put on the table. Papa wants his beloved black coffee in bed in the morning. The apartment needs to be cleaned and tidied up. Papa needs his siesta after lunch and expects to be served dinner punctually. Meanwhile, Regina must find time to write. Often this is when Papa is still in bed in the morning, is holding a siesta in the afternoon, or has already gone to bed. Fritze, she writes to her son in New York, "Where is the key to the suitcase you left behind? I want to lock it when I send it to you. And what about your books and papers? What should I do with the underwear you left behind? Your pajamas, your Panama hats? Rosel, what about the piano? What should we do with it?" Meanwhile, what is Emanuel up to? Well, he's busy too. He jumps headlong into his work, in part to distract himself, to avoid having to face the relentlessness with which the Nazis were coming after the Jews in Vienna. So what's he doing? He writes as if his life depended on it. Regina writes, he's indefatigable, undeterred, like a maniac, we would say today. He forgets everything going on around him. He's oblivious. When the time comes for Regina and Emanuel to move in with Emma, Emanuel's sister, and Siegmund, her husband, picture Emanuel sitting at the desk while all the furniture around him is being cleared out. Finally, irrefutable is what he writes about the article he is working on. Unassailable. What an astonishing claim for a scholar to make about his work, but understandable in the situation Emanuel was in. Had this manuscript been published, it would have been the 18th publication of him. And he continues to work on this. We only have 4 pages here. He continues to work on this manuscript until December 1940, more than 2 years after he started working on it. At that time, he was going blind. What else is Emanuel up to? Well, Erich brings his father his Macallum English book, and off he goes. Here it is, English Perfect, 1938 edition. What you're seeing at left is very much, in my opinion, the very book he used. And you can buy this on Amazon.uk. That's where this image comes from. If you live in Portland, Oregon, you can also find it in the library of Portland State University. Okay, what else is Emanuel up to? Well, he likes to play cards. Strohmandel is his favorite game when he's playing with Regina. It's a form of 2-player tarot. It's a conventional card game without occult associations. It is still popular in Austria and in Hungary today. What you're seeing on the left is a Strohmandel deck from 1948 or 49. I picture this very much like the cards that Regina and Emanuel played with. Well, Regina isn't always pleased by having to play cards with Emanuel. Really, he almost drives her crazy. 3, 4, 5 hours at a time, she writes, with stamina. He triumphs when he beats me, and sometimes he even cheats. But it makes Regina happy because Papa is happy. Eventually, Heraclitus, English, and Strohmandel fade away. They disappear from the correspondence one after the other. But what stays is this word Sehnsucht. Let's take a look at that word. It's a word she uses throughout the correspondence, right up to the next to last postcard that we heard earlier, and written one day before the last postcard. There's still the word Sehnsucht in her writing, right up to the end. On the left, you see the word in her own handwriting. Notice the lovely flourish and movement of her pen. Notice the comparatively small capital S at the beginning of the word. There are 4 small letters and 4 large letters and 3 large letters that follow, an H, hard to distinguish, an S, and another H. They are vigorously and resolutely written. They move up and down and up again. The word concludes with an emphatic T, bookending the S at the beginning, framing her thought. Sehnsucht is typically translated into English as longing, a powerful, emotive word. But I think the German word packs even more of a punch. It consists of two words, sehnen or longing, and Sucht or addiction. Sucht is helpless craving, painful, sore, even cruel desire. Let me translate the two first quotations on the right of your screen into English. About this, my dear children, I can only tell you that we are being consumed by a burning desire to see you. And after that, the second one, our longing for you and the children is indescribable. You can't put it into words. Another word for Sehnsucht, I think, is love. Let's look at the second example on the left. This is the end of a sentence with 4 exclamation marks. Do you think she might really want to make a point here and wants us to take note? The translation of this sentence on the right is, yet I cannot imagine that we will once again live a normal life. For Regina, it is almost unimaginable that the life she once knew will return. Now let's look at the last example on the left and notice the 4 long dashes, the extended dashes at the end of that sentence. And that sentence in English reads as follows. You see the German on the right. Of course, we still have Erich and his family here, but we must brace for the day when they too will go away, and then we will be all alone. Why the long pause, the interruption of the flow of the letter? I believe that by stopping the flow, Regina is stopping time, creating space. She really wants us to take note of this. She's making room for pulling a moment out of the relentless march of time. She holds this moment open in suspense, stopping the clock. She's talking woman to her daughter, Rose, daughter-in-law Rose here, I believe. And I ask myself, what feelings inhabit this space for her and for Rose? Fear of the unknown, what might be, what was. Like Rose, we too are invited to pause. What do we feel? Our own Sehnsucht? What do we fear? Regret? Loneliness? Our own mortality? I feel that in the context of Judaism, Jewish faith, with this emphasis on remembrance and remembering, Bob already talked about it, this pause in Regina's writing is hugely significant. What can we use this space for in our own journey? What are we remembering? Bob, Ingrid, and I have been living in this space created by Regina for 2 years now, as we have worked our way through these letters and wrestled with them. I leave you now with this thought and will move on to my concluding remarks. Prater Park is a short walk from Emanuel's and Regina's apartment. It's a quiet place that invites a visitor to repose, to linger, to fill the lungs with fresh air. It's adjacent to the Prater amusement park, but a very different place. Look at this picture of the lovely bridge in the Prater Park. Notice the intricate wrought iron railing, the gentle arch, the play of light and shade on the wooden deck. This bridge was already there in Emanuel and Regina's day, and it connects us to their world. Immediately to the back of the viewer of this bridge lies the Constantin Hügel or Constantine Hill, Emanuel and Regina's favorite spot in the park. In Emanuel and Regina's day, there was a cafe there. Let me read the text here on the left. We are now just sitting on the Constantin Hügel, have had a good snack. Papa is reading the newspaper. The sun is shining gloriously. All the trees turned green in the last few days. And if Papa were patient, I would love to send you a few pot of violets. Perhaps I will return tomorrow on my own and get some so you know how beautiful it once was here. Now look at this grainy photograph. It shows the Constantin Hügel today. The old cafe is gone. It burned down in 1977. All that's here today is a patch of grass, a few steps, some old benches at the top. It's probably May. Do you notice the blooming chestnut trees on the right? Might they have already been there when Emanuel and Regina lingered here? We don't know. It feels like we can smell the blooming trees, hear birdsong, feel the gentle movement of a spring breeze. Just like Emanuel and Regina might have experienced the place. The photograph invokes something absent, long gone, lost, like the long pauses in Regina's letters. But to me, Emanuel and Regina are still there. I picture them sitting at one of the benches, facing one another. They are not lost. They are still among us, present by the powers of imagination and remembrance to be cherished and remembered. Emanuel and Regina are alive, beckoning us to join them and converse with them. To me, the Constantin Hügel is their memorial.
Thank you so much for that, Christoph. What a beautiful tribute to them. Well, I would like to open up our question and answer period by turning first to Bob and asking you if you could share with us quickly your own emotional journey in receiving the letters and in embarking on this whole process and learning what you learned from it.
Thanks for the opportunity, and I will try to be brief, and because other people's questions are more important. But first of all, a great deal of gratitude to people at the museum, to Christoph and Ingrid for the 1,000 hours that each of them put in on this. And especially with Christoph, because he's local and we started in this together, a really deeply intimate connection, like brothers on a journey together to reconnect with their family. Were it not for COVID, Christoph and I would right now be on an interfaith pilgrimage to Israel. And that stemmed from our partnership here. I saw a very different side of my father. Younger, more playful, funny, sexy, very competent in letters that we haven't had time to share that he wrote. And that's not what I saw. And only through this have I come to realize the extent of the PTSD that he suffered by the time he had me. And the third last thing I'll share is the amount of sleep I've lost, thinking about the similarities between then and now, the barriers to immigration, and the gradual worsening of conditions that Regina keeps writing, well, you know, we can make do with this, it'll be okay. And I just see us doing that now in this country. And may it be God's will that we not follow the same course.
Amen. Well, our questions seem to be from the visitors seem to be falling into two categories. One set of questions about the letters themselves physically, and one set of questions about immigration. And I'd like to be able to address both things. Why don't we begin with Jane Rice's question here, and that will cover several of the other questions too. Can you repeat for us how the letters came to you, how they happened to survive, and how they came to you, and include in that another question that came in also about what we know about the letters that went from the US to there. Did the people in the US take any notes about what they had written, or do we find any information about, answer that?
Yeah, the letters were largely to Fritz and Rose. And I think that Rose passed them on to her daughter, Rosemary. Rosemary married Donald, and when Rosemary died in 2010, Donald reached out to me and said, Bob, I know you're interested in family stuff. Do you want the letters? They sat on my desk as a source of guilt for a number of years, because what do I do with over 100 very fragile pieces of paper written in a script I can't read in a language I can't understand? Till finally I realized I could approach my friend Anne, and she and Judy have facilitated all this. What was about letters going the other direction? My father typed letters he wrote, and there are some copies of letters that he sent to his parents that he shared the copies with Erich and Fritz. So those are in the collection. That's all we have at this point.
Great. So what do we know about the immigration process itself, about how they managed to, how the three brothers managed to get out? Do we know how difficult that was for them? Were they sponsored in the US, and their paths? Well, we know your dad's path out, but what about the others?
Should I handle that, or Christoph, do you want to talk about it?
Oh, I think you should, Bob.
Okay. Yeah, as I mentioned, the word consul or consulate is used 61 times in the letters. The word affidavit is used, I think, 90 sometimes. And to get into the US required a lot of paperwork. It required affidavits of financial support from people in the US, and then visas, and there were quotas based on country of origin. It was very hard. We have family on this call whose ancestors didn't make it out. Hans Kugel and Helena Krasny Kugel died in the camps because they could not get the immigration visas they sought, as did my grandparents. And there's this, I don't know if people picked up on it, but I think it was in 1939, Emanuel wrote a letter saying, you know, unless we get this special option because of my writing, we won't get out till September of 1939. And then in May of 1940, we're seeing, well, the consulate says that they won't open the quotas until July of 1940. And in July of 1940, the consulate doesn't really have an answer. And then there are medical exams. There's a lot of correspondence about the affidavits of financial support. Erich's wife's family, Fritz's wife's family had pretty good finances, and they were able to write affidavits of support for a number of relatives. There's one very poignant letter in there where a relative in England writes saying, would you write a letter of an affidavit of support so that my betrothed can get out? And then the next letter a few days later says, no, I know you can only do one, do it for my father instead. What a choice. And neither of them made it out. It was very difficult.
Do you know if they were receiving aid from the Joint or from HIAS for their journeys?
There's no mention of that. I don't know.
There was, hold on, the question about the mail itself. It says, I've always been fascinated that the Nazis allowed mail delivery during the Holocaust, showing the world that things couldn't be that bad. As you've been working through the letters, have you been thinking about our own issues with the United States Postal Service? I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah. First of all, letters did not always arrive promptly. Regina will write saying, in a letter dated February or March, your letter from December 7th just arrived. So it was not necessarily quick correspondence or reliable. Letters got lost. Yeah, I think the question is its own answer. That if in Nazi, go ahead, Ingrid.
At some point, Regina starts reporting very meticulously when letters arrived and when they when she writes a letter, and I mean every single one she'll mention if there's a postcard from somebody else, whatever. And I think that was a way of her to communicate with her sons, where they could see whether their mail made it to her. I don't think it was just her being, very organized about what she was doing, but I think it was definitely telling them, we got those letters. Now you check whether those are all the letters, and then if there's a message you need to tell us, then tell us in the next letter. So, yeah.
Thanks. I think that, yeah, that documentation, I think, was very telling. And, coming back to the question about, does this make me think about what's happening in this country now? I mean, to say that in Nazi Germany, there was mail delivery and we're worried about whether we're going to have it, I think that kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And also, I want to add with the mail, after a certain time, that's why there's so many postcards. They were only allowed to write postcards, and most of them were censored. And so it wasn't really a free mail service anymore, except that from that point on.
Yeah, I think all the postcards had that red censored.
Yeah, almost all of them.
I see. It's 1:05 now, so please, if you need to leave, we totally understand. But we'll go on, and we have time for some more questions if people want to ask them. On the postcards that you were just talking about being censored, are there blackout redacted parts on them?
No, Christoph, I don't think there were redacted cards. I think if if they really didn't want the postcard to go out, it just disappeared. You know, they just confiscated the postcard. But I think putting that stamp on told the writer, you better not dare write anything that's, you know, doesn't reflect well on us or something like that. I think that was the reason that stamp's on there all the time.
One person in the audience says, after Pearl Harbor, wasn't it possible to send messages through the Red Cross?
Don't know the answer to that one.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe it was. It was. My father at the time, as a German businessman in New York, corresponded with his parents and sisters in Germany through the Red Cross, and were also able to, he was able to send packages to them. And interesting, in this correspondence, there are lots of food packages going to Emanuel and Regina, organized by the three brothers, mainly by Bob's father, Gustav, in Sofia in Bulgaria. And the German or the Austrian word for these care packages was Liebesgaben, gifts of love.
One person is asking if we know if the anti-Semitism experienced in Austria was more virulent than it was in Germany, or how it compares. Does anybody have a feeling for the answer to that? I don't know.
I think it was probably the same all over the Third Reich.
Sure.
I wouldn't imagine there was no difference at the time.
I can tell a story that's a little related to that. There was a woman my father was friends with in Vienna, and she became a Nazi. And she was not anti-Semitic. She believed that Austria had Germanic roots and should be united with Germany, but was not anti-Semitic. She, in fact, helped my father with getting a visa he needed in order to escape. How common that was, I have no idea.
Right. Well, I don't see more questions here that we haven't already answered in some way. I do want to remind people that the recording will be available as soon as our webmaster puts it up on our website. It will be there. There is a past events section in the website under recorded events. You'll be able to see it. I think if you needed an email to register for this event, so we have your emails, and we will send out email about how to access that as well. I see a lot of people would like to share it with people who couldn't make it today.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, and I think, yeah. Do they have, somebody's asking if you still have any relatives living in Austria today?
There's at least one on this call. We have family on this call from Austria, Great Britain, Australia, and of course the US. We're all over.
Well, great. I'm going to go ahead and draw this to a close then. I thank all three of you for being a part of the project and for spending your time here today, sharing it with everybody. It's been wonderful working with you on this. I think we have some more work yet to do. As Ingrid mentioned in her talk, the museum is in conversation with Bob about making these a permanent part of the archival collection at the museum, and we hope to get some scholarly interest in it and to have somebody researching them. Surely something needs to be published about them. It's a wonderful collection, and it will be available for scholars to be working on, and we're going to do what we can to make more of it accessible on the website for people just to look at that beautiful script and see the translations. All right, I think we're done.
Thanks again.